He couldn't stop himself. The anticipation made him tremble, the thought alone driving him wild. His entire body felt adrenalized, heightened as waves of ecstasy coursed through him. He knew it was wrong, that he shouldn't feel this way, but he couldn't help it. He hated his life. He hated himself. He despised feeling this way. Yet the urges within him were so overwhelming, they consumed his every thought. They made him feel alive in a way nothing else could. God, why am I like this? He muttered to himself. He had tried to fight it, tried everything, but nothing worked. The impulses, the desires were an addiction, a craving for the euphoric sensations that completely overtook him, making his whole body pulse.
The girl felt out of place, her bare feet drawing attention, a tattered stolen blue dress clinging to her, and a garish shawl covering her head. With a heavy heart and a dark mood, she scanned the bustling Boulogne dockside street, uncertain of her next move. She had to get back to England, but how? Anxiety bubbled within her. Staying here, in France, only increased the risk that they would find her. She could not risk that, going back to that place. Even with her worldly charms, the amount of expense that had been shelled out to move her from the luxurious West End lodgings to Paris was too much for them to forget about. Even if it was in false pretenses with the broken promises of trinkets and fine clothes, she was kicking herself that she had fallen for all that romancing crap. She certainly would not ever do that again. Right now, she needed to find someone, a sailor maybe, who was shipping back to Blighty, ideally the London docks. The street she was on had an array of taverns. One of them must have a suitable English-speaking crewman with a weakness for a fresh-faced girl, even dressed as she was. She had a gift for sussing guys out and had learnt through hard-taught experience how to unleash their desires for her own ends. Taking extra care not to step onto any fresh horse droppings, the girl made her way along the thoroughfare, drawn to a particularly rowdy tavern where, listening intently, she was sure she could hear the caterwaul of an English sea shanty. Now this wasn't a sure sign that their next stop would be England and that she could talk her way on board. But at this very moment in time, she could think of no better plan. The thought of being in perpetuity in a Paris maison close, being worked slavishly with no reward, was too much to comprehend. She was still blessing her pure luck she had sussed in time and escaped, even if she had been half naked at the time. Getting her client blind drunk had helped the situation, but with the establishment's henchmen on her tail, she was still not safe. As she entered the tavern, she scanned the clientele. A more rough and ready scum of the earth mob would be hard to find anywhere in the world, but right now, it didn't matter. They were men, and men liked and needed women. And sure, recently she had been used to a more refined gentleman, but when it came to pleasures of the flesh, they were all the same. They were all animals. A mildly drunk man walked past her, grabbing her rear. He leered, she smiled back.
Hello?
She said.
What do you think your game is?
He wiped spittle from his mouth and slurred something undoubtedly sexual in nature in a foreign language she had not heard before. He laughed, his infectious chuckle filling the air. She had no idea what he'd said, but there was something oddly amusing about him that wasn't entirely off-putting. Still, she battered away his wandering hands. What she needed was someone who spoke English to help her with her situation, not a drunken flirtation that served no immediate purpose. She weaved her way through the crowd of drunken sailors, flirtatious women, and worn-out furniture, keeping her ears tuned for the distinct sound of an English accent. As she passed a table of particularly rough-looking men, one of them spoke loudly enough for her to catch.
I definitely would.
The girl turned to the source of the comment and smiled at him.
Hello, mate?
She said. He raised his eyebrows quizzically at her.
You're a long way from home.
She smiled and nodded.
Yeah, you could say that.
The man was a stocky, mustached fellow in his late 20s, his rough, pockmarked face telling stories of years spent at sea. He reminded the girl of the men from her youth, labourers, miners and farmhands, coarse, primal figures who lacked the polished manners of the upper-class West End men she had grown accustomed to in more recent years.
So how'd you come to be here then?
The man inquired.
My suitor promised to show me the high life and beauty of Paris, and then left me stranded without a franc to my name.
Really?
The girl could sense the sailor didn't quite believe her. The sailor stroked her frayed dress.
Hope he didn't buy you that dress.
She smiled. The bastard didn't believe her. A change of tact was needed. Come on, girl, think on your feet, she told herself.
That's a long story.
She said, trying to buy herself some thinking time.
I'm sure it is.
He laughed.
The bastard left me stranded, and I had to sell all my belongings to get this far. And this
She pulled at the top of her dress, purposely exposing some cleavage.
was all I could afford to buy.
So what you gonna do?
The girl shrugged and put on her best, innocent, vulnerable eyes. The sailor grinned again. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. She mused and smiled.
How would a girl like me get back to England, penniless and alone?
The sailor shrugged.
Do what you're trying to do, probably. Try and get herself on a ship headed for home.
Do you think I'd find someone to take pity on me?
The sailor laughed.
Maybe. He'll more than likely want something in return, though.
The girl didn't see the two heavy, thick-set men enter the bar. Both imposing, both looking, searching the patrons for someone in particular.
You drinking?
Said the sailor. The girl nodded.
I wouldn't mind. You offering?
It was just then the girl turned her head towards the bar and noticed the two men, still scanning the bar. She quickly pulled her raggedy shawl over her head to obscure her face from the men. The sailor noticed her strange reaction and looked to the source of her anxiety. He switched his gaze from the two searchers to the girl and then back to the men.
You okay?
He inquired, guessing not was all as it seemed.
Yeah, just want to get home, really.
Really? No particular reason?
No, just tired, and being alone in a foreign country is a little scary.
I bet. Especially if you've got a couple of mean-arse blokes after you.
The girl shrugged, feigning ignorance.
How do you mean?
Those two guys near the bar. I know who they are, and the sort of person they might be looking for, and why you might want to hide from them, hence why you're dressed the way you are, alone, penniless, and need a boat home.
A cold chill of dread clutched at the girl's stomach. She'd got this far. Hell! Why are all men bastards?
Are you going to tell him?
Depends.
On what?
She smiled hopefully at the sailor.
I'm sure they would reimburse me well.
The girl, desperate and unsure what else to do, tried to get up and leave. The sailor grabbed her arm and pulled her back down onto the bench.
Where do you think you're going?
The girl pulled her arm free.
Fuck you, I'm not going back there. I'll jump in the fucking sea first.
The sailor smiled in an attempt to calm her down.
Okay, alright, maybe we could come to a deal.
Deal?
The girl spat back.
I can see why you would be a valuable asset, pretty fresh-faced, buxom beauty as you are.
Bastard.
Steady on, I was paying you a compliment.
So, I'm a whore, a harlot, but from where I come from, there wasn't a lot of fucking choice. Know what I mean?
I'm sorry, I meant no offence.
The girl stared at the man.
So, what do you want from me?
The sailor watched the searchers continue to search the room.
Do you know the Ratcliffe Highway?
I've heard of it, but I don't know it.
The sailor returned his attention back to the girl.
You'll get used to it.
Not a nice place, so I heard.
The girl had heard many stories about the Ratcliffe Highway and none of them good. A place inhabited by the worst the criminal fraternity could muster near the Docklands in London.
No, but I got 2 weeks shore leave due and I spend it on the Ratcliffe Highway.
The girl had a sinking feeling.
And so?
I aim to go to America, my dear, to get away from the stench of English poverty and start a new life.
So, how does that affect me?
She said skeptically.
So, I need money. I mean, I could work my ticket, but swapping the East End for the 5 ways in New York is out of the frying pan into the fire. I need real money to start a real new life.
I don't get you. So you want to hand me into those guys? Is that right?
Tempting, but no. I'll get you aboard a steamer to London, and you in return work the Ratcliffe Highway for me.
The girl looked at the sailor with incredulous hatred and went to get up.
Fuck you!
Just as she stood, the two searchers looked in her direction. She quickly hid her face under the shawl. The sailor grabbed her arm, pulled her back down. Again, she found herself forcibly returned to sitting on the bench. God, this sailor bloke was strong, she cursed. The two searchers approached the table. The girl had her head down. The sailor eyed the two men as they stood over the table.
Can I help you boys?
Both men, bearded, 6 foot, and imposing, had eyes on the girl.
Is she with you?
One of the men said with a thick French accent.
She's my wife.
The two men shared a glance and laughed.
Yes, for sure.
The man said with more than a tinge of irony. The sailor stood up. He may have not been as imposing as the two men due to him standing 5-6 inches in his clogs, but the sailor had bulk, broad shoulders, and a threatening demeanor. The speaking searcher raised his hand in a defensive motion.
Okay, it's just that we are looking for a girl that looks just like your wife, and we would pay well to find her.
Well, my wife isn't her.
For the first time, the other man interjected.
She seems very shy.
As he nodded towards the girl face down, covered with the shawl. This man's accent was most definitely English in origin.
She knows her place.
Both men studied the cowed figure of the girl. The French man had a wry smile forming.
What's your wife's name?
What the fuck's it got to do with you?
The French man shrugged.
Curiosity.
The sailor could sense a menace about the men.
Mary Jane?
He said after a moment's pause. The girl, her face shrouded by the shawl, rolled her eyes and incredulously mouthed, Mary Jane? Silently to herself. The men shared another look.
Mary Jane?
The sailor scowled.
Yeah. You calling me a fucking liar?
The French man shrugged again and looked at the girl.
Hello, Mary Jane.
The girl nodded in acknowledgement without looking up. The sailor blocked their view with his bulk.
She's my wife, and I don't like men staring at her.
You're full of shit.
The Frenchman hissed. But when one of the sailor's shipmates, a stocky brute called Pinto, rose from another table, the English henchman laid a hand on his companion's arm. After a long, dangerous pause, the Frenchman backed off.
Be careful.
He warned before the pair withdrew into the crowd. The girl's heart thundered. Out of one trap into another. She would have drowned herself in the harbour rather than be dragged back to Paris. But for now, the danger had passed.
They're gone.
The sailor told her, sitting again. He studied her carefully.
So what is your real name?
She gave a half smile.
Mary Jane. And yours?
Jolly Jack Tar.
He said with a grin.
Really? Then where's your parrot?
He laughed.
Name's Frankie.
By the time the church bells struck 4, Frankie, his shipmate, and the girl were heading for Boulogne docks. The steamer for London was waiting. It wasn't comfort she found in its hold, only damp boards, rats, and a bucket shoved into the corner.
No company, captain's orders.
Frankie told her with a smirk.
I'll bring food. It's that or nothing.
You're a real brick!
She shot back bitterly. Still, as the ship pulled out into the grey channel, she clutched her shawl tight and let the relief sink in. She was away from Paris, away from that house, away from the men who hunted her. London would bring its own troubles, but at least there she could speak the language. The Ratcliffe Highway was an eye-opener. Mary Jane had lived in Cardiff once, years ago, a memory she never liked to dwell on, but this was worse. The stench of human waste and rot hung thick in the gutters, and the noise was relentless. Carts, hawkers, drunkards, sailors, all shouting over one another. Even the costermongers looked like they'd rob you the minute you turned your back, and their women all had the look of dolly mops. Rough, hard, and unashamed. Still, down here people did whatever they had to do to get by, living hand to mouth day to day. Mary Jane, now in second-hand boots, a maroon velvet bodice, a worn skirt and a black shawl, stopped by a coster's stall and gave Frankie a pleading look, her eyes half playful, half desperate.
I see I'm going to have my hands full with you.
He said, fishing a penny from his pocket and paying for a sheep's trotter. He handed it to her with a grin. She smirked.
Gee, you know how to treat a girl, don't you? Glad you're not a client.
They continued down the highway while Mary Jane gnawed the trotter, greasy fat glistening on her chin. She was just thankful she didn't have to wade through the filth of the streets barefoot, the congealed mess of food scraps, horse dung and worse. As they walked, she took in the sights. The endless alehouses, music halls and bawdy houses lining the road. A world away from the West End, a different planet entirely. When they reached a shabby lodging house, Frankie climbed the steps and motioned for her to follow. Mary Jane paused, eyeing the cracked plaster and sagging sign. Christ, she thought, what a shithole. Still, she'd been in worse. A heavy dread tugged at her gut, but she was used to that feeling now, almost numb to it. Frankie banged on the door with the palm of his hand. After a moment, it opened to reveal a small, stout woman with hair tied tight and a stare that could strip paint.
Frankie?
She said, giving him a curt nod before turning her eyes on Mary Jane.
Hello, Mrs. Boku. How are you?
Frankie asked cheerfully. She had a faint Dutch twang to her voice.
Found yourself a friend, Frankie. You know I don't let my rooms to couples.
That's all right.
He said.
It's just for Mary Jane here.
Mrs. Boku looked the girl up and down, lips pursed, eyes narrowing. Then she nodded, satisfied.
4 shillings a week.
Both she and Frankie turned to Mary Jane. Mary Jane shrugged, defeated.
All right.
She was shown to the room. Small, plain, damp. Not a patch on what she'd had in the West End, but that life was gone now. One wrong turn, one wrong fork in the road, and everything had changed. She should have known better. Some things are too good to be true. When Mrs. Boku left, Mary Jane stood silently, eyes lowered, while Frankie closed the door behind her.
What now?
She asked. Frankie studied her a moment, weighing his words.
I've paid your rent for the week up front.
She nodded faintly.
I meant, what do you want from me? What do I owe you?
Well,
he said, leaning against the wall.
Normally, Mrs. Boku and her husband Morganstone would be your keepers. But for the next 3 weeks, that'll be me.
Mary Jane frowned.
I don't want to be anyone's property. That's what got me here in the first place.
When I say keepers, I mean protectors.
He explained.
As long as you pay your rent, Mrs. Boku won't bother you. She'll make sure you've got a bit of safety working out of here. But for the next few weeks, things might get a bit hairy.
Mary Jane's eyes narrowed.
How do you mean?
He smiled thinly.
We're gonna roll sailors. There'll be plenty of beer, gin, laudanum, and that's where you're coming. Seduction. He tapped his chest. And if things turn rough, that's where I come in.
A cold dread washed through her. This is all I bloody need, she thought.
Hopefully.
Frankie added with a grin.
If I'm quick enough, no one gets hurt.
Mary Jane folded her arms and gave a sarcastic smile.
Great. Wonderful.
I'll look after you.
Of course you will.
She shot back.
Take me to the workhouse infirmary when me head's split open, I bet.
He ignored the jab, placing a penny on the chest by the door.
I'm off to find my own lodgings. Have a word with Mrs. Boku. She'll tell you where to get a bath.
She nodded faintly and he let himself out. Mary Jane stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, the silence pressing in. She felt the weight of the week already.
The Ratcliffe Highway at night was a cacophony of drunken singing, yelling, brawling, and debauched revelry, all bathed in the dim orange glow of the gaslights. Dark corners hid couples rutting in the shadows, while feral figures lurked like predators, ready to pounce on any drunken sailor foolish enough to stumble alone with his wages in his pocket. The gutters were alive with the half-dead. Men sprawled in their own vomit, others pissing against the walls, a few simply drinking themselves toward oblivion. Fighting seemed almost obligatory, the favoured form of human interaction, and as Mary Jane followed Frankie down the main thoroughfare, she couldn't help but think that most sailors must be half-deaf. They bawled obscenities across the street at one another, laughing through broken teeth, slamming tankards on tables, and slapping women who laughed too loudly to care. Female company was hardly in short supply, if a man liked it rough, ready, and crude. The whole scene was like a grotesque carnival of the human condition, stripped bare and left to howl.
Delightful, isn't it?
Frankie said as they walked, his voice thick with sarcasm. Mary Jane smirked.
Terrific.
When Mary Jane woke with a start, she couldn't tell if the banging was in her head or on her door. Her mouth was dry and foul-tasting. Her stomach turned, and her head throbbed like a hammer. The last thing she wanted was to be woken at all. She rubbed her eyes, and through the blur saw Frankie standing in front of her, grinning.
How are you feeling?
He said, the grin turning into a chuckle.
Sick,
she muttered, swinging her legs off the bed.
I'm not surprised. Do you even remember anything?
Mary Jane frowned, trying to piece the night together. After a long pause, she shrugged.
Bits.
You did well.
She looked at him blankly and shrugged again. Mary Jane stared at the floor. A wave of self-loathing twisted her stomach. She blinked, confused.
Bollocks, if I can remember.
Yeah?
Frankie nodded.
You seem quite taken with a bloke called Vivian from the West Indies.
Mary Jane nodded and then smiled in remembrance.
Big guy. How did him and his mates end up over here?
The way the shipping works. Unlike other countries' shipping, British ships take in at each port for each trip individually. So when a British ship docks in the Caribbean, geezers like Vivian book on for the job and then get stuck here if they can't get a trip back. You really don't remember much, do you?
Remember what?
She asked, rubbing her aching temples.
You got mouthy and told me to piss off.
She groaned.
I'm sorry. I get like that sometimes.
Frankie studied her for a moment. He almost felt sorry for her. She hadn't helped herself, but he knew she was stuck, trapped between a rock and a hard place. Still, he reminded himself, she wasn't his problem. Compassion only caused trouble, especially with women. He'd been a mug before. Never again. Mary Jane wasn't sure if her queasy stomach came from the gin or the dread that followed her everywhere lately. Some fucking future, she thought bitterly.
You hungry?
Frankie asked, breaking the silence.
I'm tired.
He sighed.
All right. Get some more sleep. I'll bring food later.
Mary Jane nodded without looking up. Frankie pulled a small vial of laudanum from his pocket, poured a few drops into a glass, added water, and placed it on the table.
Here. Drink that. It'll take the edge off and help you sleep.
She took it, drank, and slumped back onto the bed. Frankie closed the door behind him. The communal kitchen was cramped and sparse. One battered table, a few chairs, and a weak fire in the grate. Mary Jane sat opposite Frankie, dipping a chunk of rock-hard bread into a bowl of greyish soup.
What's this supposed to be?
She asked. Before Frankie could answer, Mrs. Boku appeared in the doorway, glaring.
That's the finest soup made by my own fair hand, girl. And it's free.
I wasn't complaining.
Mary Jane said defensively.
No?
Mrs. Boku folded her arms.
I've met plenty of girls who think the world owes them something, only to learn you get what you put in.
Jesus! I only asked what flavour it was.
Mrs. Boku leaned close, her breath rancid.
So, what does it taste of?
Mary Jane recoiled.
To be honest, nothing.
Chicken.
Mrs. Boku declared proudly.
Best chicken soup in London.
Frankie said, raising his eyebrows at Mary Jane. Mary Jane caught the hint.
It is mighty fine soup, Mrs. Boku.
Mrs. Boku narrowed her eyes.
I can see I'm going to have trouble with you.
Mary Jane and Frankie exchanged glances. Mary Jane went back to her soup. Mrs. Boku wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and pulled on her bonnet.
You off out, Mrs. Boku?
Frankie asked.
To market,
she said shortly and left. As the front door slammed, Mary Jane pushed her bowl away.
Full up?
Frankie asked. She shook her head.
Don't want to bring it all up again.
That'll teach you.
What? Not to deal with a sailor?
You're here, ain't you? Not being worked to death in amazing clothes.
Maybe. But I'm still working, so someone else can take my money.
Frankie shrugged.
Only for a couple of weeks or so.
The beer house on the Ratcliffe Highway stank of stale ale, sweat and sawdust soaked with blood. Frankie and Mary Jane sat in a dark corner, a single candle throwing long, greasy shadows.
You usually drink beer for the hair of the dog?
Frankie asked, studying her. Mary Jane nodded, avoiding his gaze. His stare unnerved her.
What?
She snapped.
Why are you just sitting there looking at me?
He leaned forward.
How long you been in the game?
She snorted.
Never understood that saying. It's anything but a game.
Why do it then?
I told you, had no choice.
What about the really gross stinking ones?
You learn to block it out. Be somewhere else. And once you can do that, it makes more sense than working 16 hours a day for a pittance.
Frankie smiled wryly.
That's if you're not working for someone else.
Mary Jane glared. Bastard.
There's always someone ready to take advantage.
Except the occasional fine gentleman offering a good deal.
Frankie said. Mary Jane laughed bitterly.
Fine, gentlemen. Everyone I've met turned out to be a bastard.
He raised an eyebrow.
You've got a rage in you, girl.
What do you expect? I didn't choose to be a whore.
Unfortunate, you mean?
Up yours. That's an English understatement.
He grinned.
That isn't the plan. We find a mug with more money than sense. You charm him, I'll back you up. If he bites, you top his drink with a bit of mother's blessing. Once he's out cold, we roll him.
That easy?
Oh, yes.
Frankie said, winking. Mary Jane gave him a skeptical look.
The man was raging inside as his clogs cracked the cobbles of the old nickel. The little fucker had done him over. Rigby. He better stay fucking clear of me, the man thought, fists clenched, teeth grinding as he stormed up the tenement stairs of the slum house. Inside, the doorless room was packed. 10 people crammed into one stinking space. 6 in the bed, 3 more sprawled on the floor in varying states of restless discomfort. Hungry, bored, waiting for the man to come home. He was 18, but already hard around the edges, already worn. His father sat by the fire, a dying glow, more ash than flame, and glared as his son stepped through the curtain that served as a door.
Where the fuck you been?
The old man barked.
And how much did you get?
The boy looked up, defiant. That fucker ripped me off.
Rigby.
Yeah.
Right.
The father stood, cracking his knuckles. He didn't need any more excuse than that. He'd been stripped of everything. Pride, prospects, purpose, couldn't earn enough to feed his own, no education, no hope, no light at the end of the rat-infested alley. Only one thing made him feel like a man anymore. Fighting. It was his only outlet, his one surge of power, his proof of life. When his fists flew and his blood boiled, he felt like something ancient, a lion, a warrior, a chieftain of a forgotten tribe. It didn't matter who or why. Moments like this lit a spark in the whole family. Even his wife, even his daughter. They'd join in if it came to it. Violence was the only escape from the endless grind, the only way to feel alive. And so the father and his son burst into the pub, eyes scanning for Rigby. He wasn't there. The slippery little bastard was too streetwise to hang about. But his brother was, leaning on the bar, pint in hand. That was close enough. Rigby's brother was like most of the nickel lads, ruled by 3 pleasures: fighting, fucking, and drinking. And when someone called you out, you didn't back down. Not here. Not ever. So when the father squared up to him, there was only ever one outcome. Violence erupted, man on man, woman on woman, child on child. Every instinct, every ounce of bitterness and hunger and humiliation came spilling out. Bottles shattered, chairs splintered, fists split skin, boots met bone. It wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't even about Rigby. It was about release. The only release the old nickel ever offered.
Spratling and Godley of J Division had seen it all 1,000 times before. Word went out to H Division, and soon enough Eddie, the Gov, Walt, Blue Surge, Billy, Johnny Upright, the Shah, Eli, Tommy Roundhead. The Russian and a handful of constables rattled toward the old nickel in the back of a horse-drawn Black Maria to lend a hand. Truncheons drawn, heads cracked, brawlers and troublemakers dragged off to the cells to cool their heels for the night. A regular occurrence. Some saw it as a chance to let off steam. others as a damned nuisance, but all knew it for what it was. Just another day's work for a shunter in the East End of London, especially Whitechapel and Bethnal Green. Rigby watched from the shadows, safe in the knowledge he may have started the all-out confrontation, but he never got himself involved. His reputation as a wily old scrote was well-deserved.
With a belly full of fish and chips, a vial of laudanum in her pocket, and a few pence for gin, Mary Jane followed Frankie to the Prussian Eagle in Ship's Alley, just off the highway. She'd been in rough pubs before, but nothing like this. The place was heaving with sailors from every corner of the world, shouting, singing, and pouring at painted women who looked half music hall, half corpse. Mary Jane leaned close to Frankie.
What the hell are we doing here?
Just then, glasses, fists, and tables started to fly. The cause? A masculine, rough-and-ready doxy with buck teeth and temper to match. 2 sailors, 1 German, 1 Dutch, both with the desire to spend the evening with the young lady. Mary Jane mused. They'd have their evening's work cut out with her, as the boisterous doxy aimed a powerful right hook at an advancing doorman, connecting full in his face. Meanwhile, the 2 European sailors grappled on the sawdust floor, blood flowing from a cut on the Dutchman's eyebrow. The doorman now had a firm hold on the buck-toothed doxy, who was screaming like a banshee and was propelling her towards the door. Another doorman, with a military bearing and a neck the size of a lumberjack's thigh, grabbed the grappling sailors from the floor, 1 in each hand, and soon escorted the gentleman to the exit, where he proceeded to literally hurl them into the horse shit and mud ingrained in the well-closed square cobblestones.
Nice class of clientele,
Mary Jane said in Frankie's ear, raising her voice over the cacophony of the beer-house din.
You trying to get my throat cut?
Easy targets, my dear foreign sailors in a foreign land. I put my money in a sailor's bank, but these blokes spend their money till it's gone and then return to their ships.
So what now?
Follow me.
He led her through the crowd to a set of stairs. Mary Jane sighed and followed, dodging grasping hands. Downstairs was another world, a long gaslit room with benches down either side, a band hammering out an Irish polka, and sailors and doxies dancing with reckless abandon. The air stank of gin, sweat, and lust. Mary Jane paused, taking it in. She remembered her nights at the Alhambra, the elegance, the laughter. This was the other end of the line, but men were men. They all wanted the same thing. Her eyes caught a man on a bench watching her, an owlish sneer, but money in his coat. She hesitated. Mark or menace? She looked away, then back. He was still staring. She smiled. He grinned. Win the horse or lose the saddle, she thought, and moved toward him.
Hello, handsome,
she said brightly, her mood switching in an instant.
You're a pretty one,
he said in broken English, the hint of a German accent.
Yeah?
She laughed.
Old flatterer. What's your name?
Carl.
I'm Mary Jane. Dance?
She grabbed his hand before he could answer. Soon they were spinning across the floor to the frantic fiddle and cornet. Frankie watched from the bar. 2 dances and 3 drinks later, Carl was slurring and swaying, the mother's blessing doing its work. Mary Jane felt something off about him. Not cruel, just wrong. The look in his eyes unsettled her. When he finally collapsed in a dark alley, she felt nothing but grim satisfaction as Frankie rifled his pockets and pulled out a canvas bag stuffed with cash. He grinned at her. She didn't return it. As they left Carl to sleep off his misfortune, Mary Jane asked,
What now?
Call it a night.
Frankie said. They walked in silence.
Don't approve then?
He asked. She pursed her lips.
Couldn't give a shit, mate.
He chuckled to himself. He'd have to cut her in better next time. For all her attitude, she was bloody good at what she did. And right now, she was worth her weight in gold. Back in her room, Mary Jane couldn't sleep. Maybe it was the gin, maybe the emptiness. Either way, she didn't want to be alone. She crept downstairs, the church clock chiming 2. The kitchen was dimly lit by 2 candles and the dying fire. Mrs. Buku sat by the hearth, pipe in hand. Another girl was at the table, eating toast.
Can't sleep, girl?
Mrs. Buku asked. Mary Jane shook her head.
You're up late.
I like to keep an eye on you girls, and on who you come home with.
Mary Jane slumped into a chair. The girl at the table glanced up and glared. Mary Jane smiled slightly. The other girl didn't respond.
Don't mind Frances,
said Mrs. Boku.
she's had a bad night.
No need to be a bitch, Mary Jane thought.
Oh dear.
She said sweetly, a trace of sarcasm in her tone. Frances glared harder. Mary Jane returned the stare, then, while Mrs. Boku wasn't looking, raised 2 fingers in silent defiance. Frances tore another bite from her toast without looking away. The tension broke when a door upstairs slammed open, followed by laughter and heavy footsteps.
That'll be Julia.
Mrs. Boku muttered, getting up. A woman in her 30s came stumbling down the stairs, laughing with a sailor. She shoved him out the front door and slammed it shut, still grinning as she tied up her hair. She turned to Mary Jane.
Oh, hello. Who are you?
Her tone was warm, such a contrast to Frances that Mary Jane instantly liked her.
Mary Jane?
She said, smiling. Frances snorted. The woman laughed.
Really?
Mary Jane raised an eyebrow.
Yeah.
That's all right, honey. My name's not Julia either.
She pulled up a chair, sitting between them.
But fuck 'em, yeah? That's what they call me. And one name's as good as another.
She eyed Frances's toast.
Any more of that about, old girl? I've got an awful hunger on me.
For 2 weeks, the deal played out, very successfully for Frankie. He had put away a tiny sum to help him in his journey for a new life. Mary Jane had played her part well. Mary Jane lifted her head from the pillow. A dull, insistent throb pulsed behind her eyes. Her mouth was dry, and her hair, matted and tangled, clung to the sides of her face. She sighed, a long, low groan that spoke of weariness beyond drink. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, steadying herself against the peeling wall. The room was damp, the air stale, and the yellowed wallpaper curled at the edges. There was a chipped jug and basin on the wooden stand. She poured water, cold and bracing, and splashed her face. The cracked mirror above the basin caught her reflection. After a moment, she tilted it down. She couldn't stand looking at herself. Most days, she couldn't understand how anyone else could either. She dragged a brush through her hair, wincing with each pull. Downstairs, a door slammed. A pair of boots came up the stairs, measured, familiar. Frankie. She looked around the room. Empty bottles, a battered pair of boots, her shawl slung over the chair. Same old scene. Same sense of being cornered. There was a soft knock. Frankie stepped in. She turned, offering a faint smile, but something was off. He didn't have his usual swagger. She saw it before he spoke.
You all right? You look pissed off,
she said. He hesitated, raking his top lip with his lower teeth.
I just wanted to thank you for helping me out.
Her heart dropped, though she masked it with a shrug.
That's all right. Part of the deal, remember?
He nodded.
Well, you're free now. I'm off on the next steamer, headed for the Americas.
She looked down.
Right.
I just thought I'd say goodbye. And thank you.
She pursed her lips, glanced up at him. There was something in her eyes. Maybe hope.
Don't suppose you want any company, do you?
He hesitated. The look he gave her was kind, almost guilty. Then he shook his head. Mary Jane nodded slowly.
No harm in asking. I know you wouldn't want a rank old whore like me dragging you down.
His eyes hardened, not with anger but pain.
That's not how it is. And you know it.
Really?
It's gonna be a hard life where I'm going. If I did want company, there's no one I'd rather have with me.
Just what I need.
She laughed bitterly.
Someone to take the piss and rub my nose in my own shit.
I told you, it's not like that.
Maybe she didn't believe him. Maybe part of her did. But she knew too well, when there's no future, even kindness feels like a lie. He reached into his coat and dropped 5 shillings on the table. She shook her head.
Don't. You'll need it more than me, like you said. I'm free now. I can earn my own.
They shared one last look. Then she snatched the money and shoved it back into his pocket. They were close, face to face. For a moment, neither moved. He offered a small, apologetic smile. It was genuine. She placed a hand on his chest and kissed his cheek.
Good luck,
she said.
I'll leave all the luck with you. You deserve it.
She gave a dry laugh.
Yeah, all bad, knowing my bleeding luck.
He smiled faintly, then turned and left. Mary Jane stood by the window, and listened to his boots echo down the stairwell. She sighed.
Oh well,
She muttered.
back on your own, girl. Time to earn some money.
She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, adjusted her hair, and stepped into the hallway. At the bottom of the stairs, Frances stood in a doorway, arms folded, smug grin already plastered across her face.
Oh dear,
She sneered.
lover boy left you, has he?
Mary Jane didn't reply. As she passed, the girl spat in her hair. Mary Jane spun, fists clenched, but before she could launch, Mrs. Boku was between them.
Now none of that.
The old matron barked. The girl let loose a stream of abuse from the doorway. Mary Jane snapped.
Fuck you. Fuck the pair of you.
She screamed, storming out and wiping the spit from her hair.
I don't fucking need any of you.
She stepped into the daylight and caught sight of Frankie's figure disappearing into the distance.
I don't need any of you.
She muttered again, but she wished it were true.
Newgate Prison, 1887. The air was thick with sweat, filth, and the damp chill of stone walls that had soaked up centuries of misery. In the dimly lit punishment cell, Caleb stood hunched over the crank machine, his arms trembling, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His shirt clung to his back, dark with sweat, and his fingers, red, blistered and raw, clutched at the iron handle, forcing it to turn again and again. Behind him, the prison warder, a broad, cruel-faced man with a belly full of mutton and no soul to speak of, tightened the crank with his key, making it harder with each passing minute. He watched with amusement as Caleb gritted his teeth and strained, his exhausted body barely able to keep up.
Not getting tired, are you?
The warder sneered, arms folded.
Come on.
Caleb didn't answer. He couldn't. His lungs burned, his legs ached, and every muscle in his arms screamed for relief. The crank was pointless punishment, a mechanical torture designed for no other reason than to break men's spirits. It ground on without meaning, without end. 1,000 turns for nothing. And every time a prisoner slowed, the warder would turn his key again, making it heavier, harder, crueler. By the time the warder finally let him stop, Caleb could barely stand. His arms hung limp at his sides, his head low, chest heaving. The warder chuckled, pulling out his key and spinning it idly between his fingers.
That wasn't so bad, was it?
He grinned. Then he grabbed Caleb's shoulder and hauled him toward the door. The long, echoing corridors of Newgate swallowed them as they walked, the iron cuffs around Caleb's wrists rattling with every step. The other prisoners, hollow-eyed men behind black iron bars, watched in silence as he staggered past. When they reached his cell, the warder jerked him toward the doorframe, too fast, too rough, so that Caleb's head cracked hard against the stone. Pain burst behind his eyes.
Oops,
the warder said, voice thick with mock concern.
Clumsy, aren't you?
Caleb said nothing, blinking against the black spots swimming in his vision. The warder grinned, shoved him inside, and slammed the heavy door shut with a deafening clang. Darkness. The dark, dank cell stank of rancid excrement, urine, and straw long past rotten. Caleb sat in the corner, half dozing, half waiting. Release was due, but the waiting was worse than the sentence. More than once he had heard the clatter of Blakey's on stone in the corridor outside, only for the footsteps to fade without the rattle of a key or the final nod from a screw. Still, at least there would be no more of the crank or the treadmill, no more sour skilly or tooth-breaking bread bulked out with grit. Freedom, such as it was close. He thought of the years behind him, of the soot-blackened days climbing flues as a boy, his bones bent before they'd finished growing. Most lads in the trade never reached 30. He had, though, what kind of future it left him was anyone's guess. Work on the docks for pennies? Better to find Faro again. The work would be crooked, but at least it paid. A beer, too. The thought of froth on his tongue and a baked spud in his hand made him smile. A rare thing in his life of shit. It was 2 more days before the door finally opened. Caleb was certain the screws had drawn it out to torment him, tightening the crank, shoving him into door frames, clipping him with a cosh for the smallest slight. Perks of the job for some. But when the double doors swung wide and cool air swept over his face, relief and euphoria burst through him like sunlight. He stepped out grinning for the first time in months. The street hit him like a storm. The stench of dung and frying fish, the cries of costermongers, the rattle of cartwheels, the chaos of horses and people, all jostling together. It was too much, too sharp after the silence and stench of the cell. But he drank it in like a starving man, each sight and sound almost sweet. The further he walked, the faster the shine wore off. Euphoria gave way to the old greyness. Doss houses with broken shutters, gin-soaked bodies huddled in doorways, ragged children whining for scraps. He'd nearly forgotten the scale of it. Nearly. Still, it was better than new.
Mary Jane pushed through the doors of the old Rose with a sway in her step, the fog of 2 gins humming in her blood. Whatever black mood had dragged her inside had lifted. She was lighter now, sharper, almost buoyant. Out here, the night stretched with promise. A gentleman or 2 might be found, and at least now what she earned was her own. She paused at the window, adjusting a stray curl in the glass's dim reflection. That was when another face loomed into view, grinning, sharp and spiteful. Frances, the bitch from Mrs. Boker's lodgings. Mary Jane's stomach tightened. She spun, venom already on her tongue.
What the fuck do you want?
Frances widened her eyes with that smug, needling satisfaction that always made Mary Jane wary.
Bloke looking for you?
Mary Jane tilted her head, pretending calm, though her pulse jumped.
Oh yeah?
She said, careless as a shrug.
Yeah, quite a toff too. Foreign accent.
The gin turned sour in Mary Jane's gut. She tried to mask the chill that ran through her, but Frances caught it and laughed.
Oh dear, not someone you want to see then.
Yeah?
Mary Jane said, nodding, feigning indifference.
Reckons he's your dad?
Mary Jane's lips twitched.
Will be. My dad's French, don't you know? That's why they call me Marie Jeanette.
Frances's grin deepened. She didn't buy it.
Of course he is. Past catching up with you, is it, bitch?
Mary Jane stepped in close, glare hard enough to burn.
Don't take this personal, but why don't you just fuck off?
Frances narrowed her eyes.
Gonna make me?
Mary Jane leaned closer, their foreheads almost touching.
Be my fucking pleasure?
Frances edged back with a sneer.
Be good to see an arrogant cow like you get her comeuppance.
Mary Jane shoved her back with contempt.
Don't be so smug, Coles. In this world, what comes around goes around.
Frances's grin cracked, but she spun on her heel and stalked off into the night. Mary Jane watched her retreat down the highway, the shadows swallowing her quick. Then she scanned the street herself. Damp cobbles slick with refuse, sailors drifting out of gin palaces, the dark alleys foreboding. Radcliffe Highway was never welcoming, but tonight the air pressed with something heavier. If someone really was looking for her, a man with a foreign accent, a man claiming to be her father, then she had something to fear. She considered her options and remembered the guy from the other night, Flem. He seemed very attentive. She was curious about him at the time and thought he was fun and good company, and maybe one worth looking up again. Well, now seemed like a good time to search him out and quell her curiosity. Now, with her nerves rattled, she wondered if finding him again might not just be a fancy, but a need. The King's Arms was heaving with a filthy, obscene, vulgar, riotous horde of clientele that didn't care or show any signs of self-awareness for their reckless, carefree behavior. Men drank and sang, and women passed any form of feminine restraint, coveted with a true sense of abandonment. There was no need. There was no virtue to be preserved and no future to be considered. All that mattered was the need to revel in as much pleasure and escapism from the world of misery that was waiting for them outside in the cruel, heartless world beyond the walls of the King's Arms, when it closed, its doors for the night. Mary Jane at first wasn't astonished at the atmosphere. but it was like a virus that soon infiltrated the consciousness, and she was soon reveling in the reckless rejection of everyday misery of poverty that awaited her. 2 gins in, she was happily ensconced on the lap of a Caribbean sailor whose laugh and demeanor was infectious and happy. Where it would lead didn't matter right now. Fun and laughter was to be had, and that was a rarity in the hovels and slums of the East End of London. It was then that she saw him, a moment in sight to sober anyone and drag her from the delusions of escape. He was watching her and glared in a way that said he was not the slightest bit interested in the frivolities of the patronage. He was only interested in her, and not in a pleasant liaison-type way. Mary Jane was thinking quickly. She had to escape and get away. What to do? She grabbed her drinking partner and dragged him to his feet, trying to use him as a shield. She tried to usher him out of the door, but for some reason he didn't want to leave his mates, and she whispered in his ear, making her excuses to head for the bar. Hiding behind masses of cavorting and carousing drinkers, Mary Jane made a bolt through the back doors of the pub, out into an adjoining alleyway. The watcher had seen her disappear out of the door and followed. Mary Jane had gotten to know all the dark shadows of the alleyways of the highway from her activities with Frankie. Down one narrow thoroughfare, turning into another and travelling past a rookery, not knowing where she was heading. The watcher had exited the pub, fully intending to find her. He followed her as best he could. Mary Jane had heard his footsteps over the fading roar of the King's Arms, and she quickly edged into a dark, dank rookery, back pressed tightly against the damp, sooty wall in the shadows, hidden from the dim gaslight illuminating the adjoining alley. The watcher scanned every aspect of his surroundings. There was a hunger, a desperation in his searching. Mary Jane closed her eyes in fear and hoping beyond hope he would just go away. She held her breath as the watcher moved within inches of her hiding spot. The watcher searched, his eyes inspecting every inch of his surroundings, scrutinizing every sound, creak and whistle of the wind, listening for any giveaway clues of his intended prey. Holding her breath, she listened as the sound of footsteps decreased. She let go of her breath and vowed. She had to get away from the highway, but where? The rain began to fall, heavy. Torrents gushed down the highway, flooding gutters and sweeping along filth, horseshit and refuse. People dashed for cover, into pubs beneath awnings, crowding doorways. Mary Jane lingered in the shadows on edge. She had ventured back into the open, but the watcher from the King's Arms was nowhere to be seen. That meant little. He could be sheltering close by, waiting, watching. One thing she knew, he wasn't her father. Her father was dead. She had watched him die. A strange, conflicting pang struck her at the thought, regret mixed with relief, even after the cruel things he had called her. Human nature, she supposed. She stayed put in the doorway. Better to remain still and unseen than risk drawing eyes. The rain hammered harder, sending people scurrying past, some ducking into her shelter. First a young couple, a sailor and a dolly mop, arm in arm, laughing drunkenly. Then a shunter, who barely glanced at her as he shook the wet from his coat. She kept her face hidden beneath her shawl. The third man made her heart jolt. He looked, for an awful moment, like the watcher. But when he turned, she saw it wasn't him, and the dread drained from her chest. Then, as the downpour thickened, another figure darted across the street and leapt into the doorway beside her. He grinned when he saw her. Mary Jane's heart leapt with relief. "Flem,
what the hell are you doing here?"
he said, smiling with a sly wink.
"Waiting here for the man of my dreams,"
she replied.
"Really? Not a bloody nightmare, I hope."
"Buy me a drink and we'll find out,"
he laughed.
"Best offer I've had in a while."
And just like that, Mary Jane had found her escape from the highway. Where it would lead was another matter entirely.
Gate. The air inside the Black Swan was thick with pipe smoke and the sharp tang of spilled gin. The low-ceilinged room heaved with life. Sailors fresh off the docks, pickpockets watching for easy marks, scarred prize-fighters nursing bruised knuckles, and painted women who had long stopped pretending to be coy. In one corner, a gang of cutthroats from the Ratcliffe Highway nursed their drinks, eyes scanning for trouble or opportunity, often the same thing in this part of London. Near the door, A group of soldiers, still in their red coats, shouted bawdy songs, their pockets already lighter from gambling and drink. The wooden floor, sticky with ale and filth, trembled under the heavy boots of dockers and thieves alike. A man stumbled back from the bar, clutching his nose where another had just broken it, blood dripping onto his frayed coat. Laughter followed, cruel and sharp, as a bare-knuckle fight erupted near the fireplace, chairs scraping, mugs shattering, men roaring like beasts in a pit. Outside, the rain pattered against the grimy windows, the gaslights flickering in the damp, choking fog. Beyond Hanbury Street, beyond the stinking alleys and the shadowed figures who lurked within them, the great city pulsed, its heart beating fast, hungry and unforgiving. But here, inside the Black Swan, the night was young, and no one left with their purse or their pride intact unless they knew how to fight for it. The door of the Black Swan crashed open, slamming against the wall with a violent bang. A gust of cold, wet air blew in from Hanbury Street, momentarily cutting through the thick fog of sweat, smoke, and stale beer. Then, like the devil himself stepping into a pit of sinners, Jack O'Brien strode inside, bare-chested, fists clenched, and eyes wild with fury. His skin, slick with rain and sweat, gleamed under the dim gaslights. A raw bruise bloomed on his ribs, and his knuckles were already red. Whether from a fight earlier or just the sheer force of his grip, no one could tell. He reeked of whiskey and the kind of rage that had no reason, no direction, just a hunger to lash out, to break something, to hear the crunch of bone under his fists. The noise in the pub faltered for a heartbeat as heads turned. Conversations stuttered, dice paused mid-roll, and a few hands twitched toward knives or broken glass. Everyone in the East End knew a man like Jack. Big, reckless, and dangerous. A man who didn't care if he left a pub on his feet or on a stretcher, so long as he got his fight. His lip curled as he stalked toward the bar, his bare chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He barely noticed the wench who sidestepped out of his way, eyes downcast, or the old drunk who shrank back against his chair. Instead, he turned, scanning the room like a wolf, sniffing for prey. A nervous chuckle rippled through the crowd, but no one looked his way. Not yet. They knew how this game was played. Jack O'Brien wasn't looking for an insult. He wasn't even looking for a reason. He just needed the smallest excuse. And sooner or later, someone in the Black Swan was going to give it to him. Outside in the shadows, the rain dripped from the tattered brim of the feral man's cap, running in thin rivulets down his gaunt, dirt-streaked face. He stood motionless in the deep shadow of the alley, a forgotten creature of the old nickel, where even the rats knew to move in packs. His eyes, small and sunken, never left the entrance of the Black Swan. He watched as Jack O'Brien stormed inside, the noise of the pub swallowing him whole. A slow breath left the man's cracked lips, and he shifted slightly, just enough to press his back against the damp brick wall. Why was he watching? There was always a reason. Perhaps it was the promise of violence, an evening's entertainment, watching men tear each other apart over spilled beer and bruised pride. Or perhaps he was waiting for someone, a man who wouldn't leave that pub upright, someone easy to follow, easy to drag into the dark and strip of his last shilling. Maybe it was something deeper, something old, a grudge festering in the filth of Whitechapel's slums, waiting for just the right moment to crawl out into the light. A dog barked somewhere down the alley, a sharp, ugly sound that made him flinch. He pulled his coat tighter around his thin frame, retreating an inch deeper into the shadows. He would wait. The night was long, and the Black Swan had a way of spilling its worst out into the streets before dawn. The waiting man barely moved, when the three figures emerged from the deeper shadows behind him. He had heard them coming, boots scraping against the wet cobbles, the quiet snicker of a blade being tested against a calloused thumb. These men weren't the desperate, starving kind like him. They were different. The blind beggar gang, rough men, killers when they had to be, and sometimes just because they felt like it. The tallest of the three, a broad-shouldered man with a thick scar down one cheek named Toby, stepped forward and flicked a glance toward the Black Swan. He didn't need to speak. The feral man already knew what was expected. Still, a few damp coins were pressed into his grimy palm. Payment for a job, small, dirty, and probably dangerous. The feral man stared at the money for a moment, his cracked lips twitching into something that might have been a grin, or maybe just the grimace of a man who hadn't smiled in years. He nodded once and shoved the coins deep into his rags before slinking forward, hunched and quick, toward the glow of the gaslights spilling from the pub's entrance. Behind him, the gang members watched in silence. They weren't going anywhere. Not yet. The feral man knew better than to ask questions. If the blind beggar boys wanted something done, it wasn't his place to wonder why. Maybe it was a setup. Maybe someone inside needed a message sent in blood. Maybe Jack O'Brien's blind rage was about to be nudged in just the right direction. It didn't matter. All that mattered was that the night was moving toward violence, and in the East End, violence was the only honest currency there was. The moment the feral man stepped inside the Black Swan, the stink of sweat, smoke, and spilled beer hit him like a wall. The air was thick with noise, raucous laughter, the slap of cards on wood, the occasional threat muttered between clenched teeth. But he wasn't here to drink, gamble, or linger. He had a job to do. His sharp, rat-like eyes swept the room until they found Jack O'Brien, still shirtless, still simmering with the kind of rage that just needed a spark. The feral man didn't hesitate. He cupped his hands around his mouth and bellowed,
"Oi, O'Brien, I've been looking for you, you cunt."
For a second, the whole pub seemed to inhale at once, but they knew what was coming, seen it 100 times, so some shirked away, not wanting trouble. But others bristled at the thought of breaking the dull monotony. Jack O'Brien's head snapped up, his expression twisting from confusion to white-hot fury in the space of a heartbeat. His broad chest heaved as he squared his shoulders, fists already tight.
"Oh, are you? Well, I've been waiting for you, fucker!"
He snarled, shoving a chair aside as he stepped forward. The feral man grinned, yellow teeth flashing in the dim light. He knew what was coming. He welcomed it. Jack moved fast, crossing the space between them in 2 long strides before launching a fist straight into the feral man's jaw. The crack of knuckle against bone rang through the pub like a pistol shot. The feral man crumpled, but not before he'd grabbed a tankard from a nearby table and smashed it against Jack's ribs. And that was all it took. Chaos erupted. A bottle flew across the room, shattering against the bar. Someone lunged at Jack, and suddenly fists, boots, and broken glass were flying in every direction. A sailor swung wildly, a dock worker looked on enjoying every second, a chair splintered over a man's back, and the room filled with the roar of men, too drunk and too mean to care what they were fighting for. Blood spattered the floor. A body crashed into a table, sending cards and coins flying. The barmaid screamed as she ducked beneath the counter. And the landlord, an old East End villain who had seen it all, just sighed and reached for an axe handle he kept under the bar. The Black Swan was alive with violence, and outside, in the shadows of Hanbury Street, the blind beggar gang watched and waited. Everything was going exactly as they had planned.
Upstairs in the Black Swan, the air was quieter, though the floorboards trembled with the violence erupting below. A single oil lamp flickered on a scarred wooden table, casting long, jagged shadows against the peeling wallpaper. At the table sat a man who, despite his shabby genteel clothing, carried himself like he owned the world. Riley. His coat, once fine, was now worn at the cuffs. His boots, though scuffed, had been made by a craftsman. His face, lean and sharp, bore the unmistakable look of a man who had climbed out of the gutter but never quite left it behind. He was laconic, menacing, and important, and he was counting money. The coins and notes stacked neatly before him told a story. Protection money, gambling debts, cuts from robberies, smuggling, and God knew what else. He licked a thumb and flicked through the crumpled notes, calm, methodical, uninterested in the chaos beneath his feet. Across the room, his two big men stood like statues, their presence a silent warning to anyone foolish enough to intrude. Burly, scarred, and thick-necked, they were the kind of men who didn't need weapons to kill, though they carried them anyway. Then came the unmistakable sounds of a full-blown riot downstairs. Shouting, the smash of glass, the heavy thud of bodies hitting wood and bone meeting bone. The two heavies exchanged glances.
Should see what's going on.
One muttered, already rolling up his sleeves. The other nodded, reaching for a lead-weighted sap tucked inside his coat.
Could be trouble.
Without waiting for approval, they turned and strode toward the stairs. Their boss barely acknowledged them, still calmly stacking coins, his fingers moving with the precision of a banker. He didn't need protection. If someone was stupid enough to come through that door, they wouldn't leave the way they came. And besides, he already knew how this night was supposed to end. The two big men descended the stairs into hell. The Black Swan had erupted into a full-scale brawl. The air was thick with sweat, booze, and the coppery tang of fresh blood. Tables were overturned, chairs splintered, and the floor was slick with spilled beer and worse. Near the bar, Jack O'Brien had his fists wrapped around the throat of a man who'd been stupid enough to swing at him. The feral man who'd started it all lay half-conscious in the corner, blood dribbling from his split lip, but there was no stopping the chaos now. A sailor with a broken nose wrestled a dock worker into a table, smashing tankards aside. In another corner, a pair of whores screamed as they scrambled out of the way of two men trading brutal punches. Then, the two heavies stepped into the room. They didn't shout, they didn't threaten, they just moved. The first, a bald, barrel-chested brute, grabbed a man mid-swing and drove a knee into his gut so hard the poor bastard crumpled, wheezing. With one hand, he tossed another brawler aside like a sack of potatoes, sending the man crashing over a table. The second, a thick-necked enforcer, drew his lead-weighted sap and cracked it against a drunkard's temple. The man dropped like a stone. Another fighter, a wiry, sneering type, came at him with a broken bottle. Big mistake. The heavy stepped inside the swing, grabbed the attacker's wrist, and twisted. Snap. The broken bottle hit the floor before the man even had time to scream. The chaos didn't stop, but it shifted. The regular brawlers, dockers, thieves, and off-duty soldiers weren't used to real enforcers getting involved. Some backed away, knowing when a fight wasn't worth it. Others, too drunk or too stupid to care, kept swinging. Jack O'Brien, wild-eyed and breathing hard, turned just as the bald enforcer stepped toward him. His fists tightened, shoulders squared. Another fight? Good. But upstairs, the laconic important man was still counting money, and outside, the blind beggar gang was still waiting. This night wasn't done, not by a long shot. The fight downstairs was the perfect distraction. While the pub boiled over with violence, the three men from the blind beggar gang moved fast, slipping through the back alley and up the narrow wooden staircase at the rear of the Black Swan. The stairs were dark, slick with damp, and creaked under their boots, but no one heard. The chaos below drowned out everything. At the top, they reached the door. The leader, Toby, pulled a long knife from his belt. His two colleagues, one a wiry man with sharp eyes and a cruel mouth called Paddy, the other a smaller, younger man called Little Alfie with a missing front tooth, tensed, ready. He nodded. They burst in. The laconic, menacing Riley barely had time to react. He looked up, fingers still idly sifting through the stack of notes, his expression unreadable even as the door flew open. For a second, he didn't move. Maybe thinking this was a mistake. Maybe thinking his men were about to come back up the stairs. Then the knife was at his throat.
"Don't!"
the wiry man whispered, pressing the blade just enough to let him feel the sharp edge. The other two moved fast, Paddy shoved him back in his chair while little Alfie swept the money into a sack, coins and crumpled notes vanishing in seconds. Riley exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing. He didn't know who they were, but knew they wouldn't have done this without a reason. Still, he didn't struggle, didn't beg, just watched, cold and calculating as they took everything. The leader grinned.
Should have kept your boys upstairs, shouldn't you?
Then, just as quick as they came, they were gone, slipping back out into the darkness, the loot in their hands. Downstairs, the fight was still settling, the enforcers barely regaining control. No one noticed 3 shadows disappearing into the night. But upstairs, the man left behind sat very still. His expression never changed. Slowly, he reached up, touched the spot where the knife had been at his throat, then wiped his fingers together as if brushing off dirt. Then he stood, straightened his shabby but genteel coat and smiled. This wasn't over, not by a long shot.